Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to this dialogue. Today on the show, we're going to unpack a lot as we delve into a range of unfolding developments in Ethiopia, from the commencement of natural gas production to the progress of the fertilizer complexes, and of course, the historic inauguration of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And to help me put all this into perspectives, I'm so honored to be joined by former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Africa and U.S. Ambassador to Guinea and Ethiopia, long-term U.S. diplomat Tibor Nagy, whose insights and expertise on these topics will undoubtedly be both remarkable and invaluable. I'm your host, Shifarao Lako. Do stay with us. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you have been busy over the week. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. You know how much I enjoy Ethiopia-related issues.
Yes, sir. I specifically am so grateful to you because you follow new developments unfolding in Ethiopia, and also you provide constructive and amazing insights, which are really admirable. Thank you again, sir.
No, my pleasure. You know, I sometimes think that in a past life I may have been Ethiopian, because for some reason my heart really goes out to Ethiopia.
Thank you so much. Jumping right into our discussion, Ambassador, I would really like you to begin our conversation regarding AGOA vis-a-vis the continent of Africa in general and Ethiopia in particular. As you know, AGOA's exploration has been described as an own goal for U.S.-Africa relationship. From your diplomatic and also academic vantage points, sir, what structural reforms and policy reimagining should the USA pursue in order to make a renewed AGOA genuinely transformational for African economies in general, and of course to Ethiopia's economy in particular, as a country that's industrializing?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, we have to remember that AGOA is, more than 20 years old, and the economy has changed so much since then that industries which weren't even in existence then now are becoming very important. You know, I'm talking about technology, cyber, artificial intelligence. So in one respect, I'm very sorry that AGOA expired without it being renewed. And as you know, I was very opposed to taking AGOA away from Ethiopia, and it was taken away. But now I believe everybody on the U.S. side would like to see a renewal of AGOA, but it needs to be in a new form that really allows Africa, United States to both benefit from it. You know, AGOA never met the objectives because for most of the years of AGOA, the major commodity was natural resources exports, for example, oil, that came to the United States. And only a few countries really took advantage of the industrial part. You know, South Africa was one, a couple of Mauritius another. So now the new AGOA really needs to look at the new Africa, the new industries, and how can everybody benefit from that. Ethiopia, I assume, would be one of also the primary beneficiaries.
Let's take some time and talk about major projects, including the $10 billion Bishop International Airport, which is going to be positioned as Africa's biggest aviation hub. In this regard, how might this project, sir, reshape Ethiopia's geostrategic weight in the Horn of Africa in particular, and in the border Red Sea corridor in general?
Well, you know, Ethiopia has an unbelievably valuable natural resource in Ethiopian Airlines. That has been one of the jewels of Ethiopia for decades and decades. So that makes Addis Ababa just naturally what I would call a natural hub for a large part of Africa. One of the problems with Addis Ababa Airport, as we who have been there know, is the elevation, because it is so high that it's very difficult, especially for loaded airplanes, to take off, and only a very few large aircraft can use it. So moving the airport to a lower elevation where there's room to expand, I think is going to be just a huge boost to Addis Ababa as a central point in Africa, but also to Ethiopian Airlines and other airlines and carriers that might want to come into Addis Ababa, but have been unable to because of the location of the current airport. So I think it is a fantastic initiative. It is needed for the future and is going to tremendously benefit the country.
Still staying on some of the major projects happening in Ethiopia. As you know, Ethiopia's new liquefied natural gas, LNG, and also fertilizer complexes in the Somali region, they seek to shift Ethiopia from import dependency to industrial self-reliance. In your view, how might such mega projects alter Ethiopia's domestic economic trajectory and its geopolitical leverage in the Horn of Africa?
Okay, so looking at Ethiopia, we know that fertilizer is a critical component because Ethiopia still is basically an agricultural country, and agricultural productivity is a huge, huge issue. As we also know, an awful lot of the farmers have been basically subsistence farmers, not raising much more than what they can to feed their families. And we also know that many farmers have not used fertilizer because of the costs involved. So Ethiopia making its own fertilizer to provide for its agricultural sector will be a tremendous boost for the future of the country. Of course, at this stage, you know, we talk about mega projects and everybody wants to be optimistic. We have to have a little bit of realism to evaluate the project when it's actually finished, to make sure that it meets the objectives of when the project was first proposed. So it's wonderful to cut the ribbon on a mega project, but it's even more wonderful to see what comes out of it.
Interesting. A country with about 130 million people, with the number still growing, it has been calling for access to the outlets in a peaceful manner, and Ethiopia's recent discussions around gaining sea access have attracted considerable regional interest, as you know, Ambassador. From a diplomatic and developmental point of view, how can Ethiopia advance in its aspirations for maritime access through constructive dialogues as well as mutually beneficial partnership with its coastal neighbors continue, and what are your overall observations in this regard, especially as a diplomat?
So issue number one, Ethiopia, we know, is the world's largest landlocked country. Issue number two, for a country of 140 million people that is trying to industrialize and depends on exports, access to the sea is absolutely essential. It's almost an existential issue. So Ethiopia needs to have access to the sea. There are several potential avenues because, as we know, there are a number of possible ports that Ethiopia can use. Right now, it is more or less dependent on the port of Djibouti, which is not a healthy situation for a country. We also know that there was at one point some interest in using Somaliland, which I personally think is a very useful avenue. Of course, there are the Eritrean ports. Unfortunately, a lot of analysts have said, oh my gosh, Ethiopia wanting to pursue using Eritrea ports means that there's a possibility of reigniting conflict in the Horn of Africa, which I know everybody understands that it is in nobody's interest to have a renewed conflict in the Horn of Africa. So, you can access the ports through treaties, which exists in a number of parts of the world where countries that are landlocked access ports that are not. Obviously, the country of the port would maintain sovereignty, but Ethiopia would have guaranteed rights of access to the port, of using its own customs, and that's there are a number of potential ports. There are a number of ways of doing that without reverting to any kind of hostilities. But the bottom line is that Ethiopia needs to have a guaranteed access to the sea.
One of the new developments happening in Ethiopia is the landmark inauguration of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. As you know, this historic milestone has ignited a profound unity and national pride among Ethiopians. Let me take you back to the very day, Ambassador, that the foundational stone was laid in Ethiopia. I'm sure that you recall this. And in retrospect, how confident were you back then that Ethiopia would be able to see this huge project through to completion, sir?
I was 100% confident because I know from my experience that Ethiopia as a nation, if it decides together to pursue a goal, they will achieve that goal. So I was absolutely sure that the GERD would be completed.
Wow, interesting. As you know, the journey hasn't been easy over the past 14 years, and the GERD has faced its own share of challenges, ups and downs, from internal hurdles to international pressures, and even distorted images on the international arena and platforms. How did Ethiopia, in your opinion, sir, manage to stay the course and navigate these turbulent waters, if you will?
Well, as I said, in my diplomatic experience, I have found Ethiopia to be incredibly goal-driven, that when it decides it's going to do something, literally come hell or high water, it's going to do it. And of course, for those of us who have to deal with Ethiopia on certain issues, we call it stubbornness. The Ethiopian point of view is that it's persistence. So whether there was controversy in the region where we had to do injections or whatever you have, as I said, I had no doubt that the GERD would be completed, and it would. I predict when history looks at it, it will be shown to have been of tremendous benefit, not just to Ethiopia, but to the entire region.
Given that Ethiopia contributes about 85% of the Nile waters through its Abai River, how justifiable is it for external actors, particularly Egypt, Ambassador, to pressure Ethiopia into adhering to some colonial-era water agreements that were established without the participation of upstream countries?
As you well know, ever since this whole controversy started, I have kept making the point that despite the history, the current geopolitical dynamics are totally different than when the colonial treaties were drawn up. Again, let's look at the fundamental situation. As you said, Ethiopia contributes about 85% of the waters into the Nile. Egypt, which has claimed control 100%, contributes not one drop of water to the Nile. Yes, historically in the past, Egypt was much more powerful. Look at the current geopolitical realities and deal with that instead of trying to stand on past historical colonial documents which no longer reflect reality.
Now that the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is a reality, after 14 years of rigorous work and persistent challenges, those ups and downs, what are some of the lessons that Ethiopia in particular, and perhaps other African countries, take away from such rigorous journey over the years of constructing and operating a project as complex as the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance?
Well, I think one of the takeaways is that Ethiopia and a number of other African countries have the capacity and the ability to pursue and construct large projects like that without depending on international support. For example, one of the things about the GERD that for me was extremely impressive was that the financing came from Ethiopians inside the country and the very large Ethiopian diaspora outside the country. As you said, it is a huge point of pride for all Ethiopians, no matter what their political beliefs, no matter what they think about the current Ethiopian government. I think you would find very, very few Ethiopians that were opposed to the GERD plan. So I think it's a great lesson for countries like Ethiopia, and it should be a boost to self-confidence to say, you know, we don't need to put our hand out to the international community to finance all of these projects, because with unity always comes strength, and there is strength in the people.
That's a powerful message, Ambassador. I think it has taken on a symbolic role among Ethiopians and, of course, at the continental level. In this regard, how exemplary is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam in galvanizing African brothers and sisters into action, into taking up such huge action and such colossal projects as the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam?
It should be a point of pride for the entire continent. And I'm very hopeful that Egypt will come around, because, as I said, I think in the long term, it will be proven to be beneficial to both Sudan and Egypt. So I think the rest of the continent can look at this and say, wow, you know, here is just a mega project that the country designed, built on its own. It had its own engineers. You did not need, you know, people coming in from China or Europe or the United States. That this was a wholly managed Ethiopian project. And, you know, let's forget about, you know, some of the vestiges of colonialism and the expertise that comes from foreign lands, and let's develop our own natural resources and our greatest resource, which is our people.
As we have been discussing so far, Ethiopia has taken on a number of projects. Some are already complete, some are in the pipeline. What's the future that you see for Ethiopia in the face of different challenges? How should it navigate, and what's the future that you see for Ethiopia?
Well, you know, I see an extremely bright future for Ethiopia. I see it very quickly becoming a middle-income country and then progressing onward. Ethiopia definitely should be one of the natural leaders of Africa and the region. Obviously, you know, we have to talk about the obvious, which is internal reconciliation, because of the current divisions within Ethiopia, which are weakening the state. So those have to be addressed. I'm an optimist, because there are solutions to those, and it's just a matter of reconciliation within Ethiopia itself, to where everyone looks at the future the way they did at the GERD, and say, to get to that very promising future for this nation and for these people, we are going to have to unify, but that means having some kind of a national reconciliation, so that everybody that's sitting in the boat is pulling the oars in the same direction. Because as we know right now, people sitting in the boat, some people are pulling the oars in a different direction.
Yes. As you know, Ethiopia and the United States of America have enjoyed years of diplomatic relations, and they are still enjoying a friendly cooperation. How should it continue in the future?
I foresee a very fruitful and, you know, win-win, cooperative, mutual beneficial relationship, because it's almost the natural relation is almost like a hand going into the glove. It's a natural fit, and it will tremendously benefit both countries. And now, as the Ethiopian diaspora in the United States becomes more prosperous, it grows not only in economic influence, but also in political influence. So I think more and more American politicians are going to be listening to their Ethiopian constituents. And as I said before, if there is national reconciliation in Ethiopia, that means the diaspora will also be united, so that they will have a single message to tell the American politicians regarding relations between our two great nations.
Interesting. Let's scale this up and talk about the relationship between the continent of Africa and the United States of America.
Right now, Africa, I think, is in an advantageous position, because Africa has some of the treasures that the entire world desperately needs for this 21st century economy. So if Africa handles this wisely, not only will the countries benefit, but the people in those countries will benefit. We all know that some of the African countries are literally the richest countries in the world. And the, the trouble has been that the richest countries with some of the poorest people. So to help the populations of Africa, of course, the countries need to share the wealth amongst their own people. But the wealth will be coming because, as I said, Africa is in a tremendous position of being able to deal with the rest of the world. They are not limited to, oh, we can only deal with China, we can only deal with America, we can only deal with Europe, or we can only deal with the Gulf Arabs. No, African countries can deal with whoever they want to deal with and get the best deal possible. So, if Africa does it right, it really can be the African century. Yes. If Africa does not do it right, then the century is going to end up the same way as it was when it started.
I don't want to take up much of your time, Ambassador, but I really want your final message to Ethiopians in particular and to Africa in general. Could you just give us some of your wishes, your final thoughts?
My prayer every day is that Ethiopia will achieve its natural greatness, because it can do that as long as it gets over this rough period of internal dissension, and with national reconciliation, it can really be one of the leading countries in the world.
Tibor Nagy, former U.S. Ambassador to Ethiopia and long-term U.S. diplomat, thank you so much for those wonderful and brilliant ideas. And of course, thank you very much for standing by Ethiopia and providing those constructive thoughts and wishes. I really, really appreciate it, sir.
Thank you very, very much, and have a phenomenal rest of the day.
Thank you, sir. You too. That brings us to the end of today's program. We've covered a lot of ground, from Ethiopia's natural gas production and fertilizer projects to the historic inauguration of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. A huge thank you to my guest today, Ambassador Tibor Nagy. And of course, a huge thank you to you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us so far. And until I see you next time with yet another program, stay safe and keep the discussion going.